My name is Grace Thompson. I am 27 years old, and I was once foolish enough to believe that love could survive without the weight of gold. I was born in the dusty village of Eldridge, tucked in the pine hills of Vermont, in a home that smelled of melted wax, sawdust, and paint thinner. My father was a woodcarver and part-time artist, known across the county for his hand-carved figurines and floral-painted brooches. We never had much money, but the walls of our home were filled with colors and kindness. By 16, I knew how to cut glass with precision, how to polish agate until it shimmered, and how to sketch jewelry designs in the margins of old books. My mother, before she passed, used to say I had a jeweler's heart and a dreamer's hands. That was before Caleb Merrick came into my life. He was the son of Harold Merrick, a wealthy merchant who owned the only shipping warehouse between Eldridge and Stonefield. The Merricks were people of silk handkerchiefs, pocket watches, and boots that never saw mud. I first met Caleb in the early spring when I was 19, in the church garden where I often went to sketch alone. He was tall, confident, with golden brown curls that hung just above his collar and a grin that had the weight of someone who always got what he wanted. But that day, he didn't look like the merchant's son. He looked like a boy with nowhere to go. "You always draw flowers?" he asked, glancing over my shoulder. "Sometimes," I replied. "Other times I draw what I want to wear but can't afford." He smiled. "That makes you an artist." "I prefer hopeful." He laughed at that, and I remember thinking what a sound to fall in love with. Caleb returned every week. Sometimes he brought me charcoal pencils, other times folded poems. He said he admired my talent, but I knew he liked my simplicity, like the way I saw the world without its velvet curtain. He said I was unspoiled by wealth. By Christmas that year, I believed he would marry me. He didn't kneel or shout, or gather a crowd. He simply brought me a small, crumpled piece of linen cloth with a ring inside. A wooden ring hand-carved, smooth, with a small tulip etched at the center. "My favorite flower. This is all I have now," he said, "but it's honest. Love doesn't need diamonds." I cried when I wore it, not from sadness but because I believed it. He kissed my hands and promised, "One day, I'll give you more." For 2 winters, we met in secret at the stream behind the lumber mill, in the empty barn near the peach orchard, and sometimes in the pews of the old chapel after evening prayer. He said his father would never approve, that I needed to wait until he could prove to him that love mattered more than money. I waited, I trusted, I dreamed, until the 3rd Christmas. I had heard whispers first from Mrs. Dobbins, the seamstress, then from Mrs. Miller who helped with the Merrick's decorations that the Merrick family was hosting a private engagement dinner for Caleb. I dismissed it as gossip. Then, on Christmas Eve, I delivered a package of carved candlesticks my father had made for the Merrick servants. That's when I saw them, through the grand windows of the Merrick estate, under a glittering chandelier, surrounded by lace and roses. Caleb, dressed in navy blue, was down on one knee, slipping a 3-carat diamond ring onto the hand of Marian Belaford, the daughter of the region's wealthiest landowner. The crowd cheered. My throat closed. I looked down at the wooden ring still on my hand, once smooth, now worn, and I felt something break, clean and sharp, like glass under a boot. I turned away. Before he saw me, I didn't cry until I reached home. And even then, it wasn't loud. It was quiet, like the sound of something sacred being buried. The next morning, Christmas Day, Eldridge was quiet under a light snow. I didn't come downstairs. Not for tea. Not for hymns. Not even when Mrs. Reynolds, our kind neighbor, came by with fig cookies wrapped in paper. I sat by my small window with the wooden ring still on my finger, cold and heavy, though it weighed nothing. My father didn't ask what happened. He only knocked softly and left a note beside a plate of toast. "Whatever broke, it didn't break you. Love, Papa." That was the only comfort I allowed myself. For weeks, I walked the town with hollow eyes. Every corner reminded me of Caleb's voice. Every tree and step and church bench carried the echo of a promise now broken. But one afternoon, as I passed the small jewelry shop owned by Mr. Harlan, the town's aging watchmaker, I stopped. His window, usually dusty and unadorned, was filled with polished stones: garnet, moonstone, amber, aquamarine. They weren't cut to perfection, but they glimmered. They reminded me of my mother's stories, how she used to say that even the earth cried beauty through stones. A sign hung on the inside: "Apprentice wanted. Inquire within." I stood there for 10 minutes. I didn't have references. I didn't have money, but I had sketches, hundreds of them. I stepped inside, heart pounding. The shop smelled of brass and cinnamon polish. Mr. Harlan looked up, his glasses fogged and resting too low on his nose. I'd like to apply, I said, for the apprenticeship. He stared at me for a moment, and then smiled. You're the Thompson girl, aren't you? Your papa carved that cherrywood mantel in my parlor. Yes, I nodded. And I carve too, but mostly I design. I want to learn to make real pieces. He gestured toward the stool behind the counter. Then sit. Let me see your hands. I sat. He examined them carefully, turning my palms, checking the shape of my nails, even brushing his thumb across the tip of my middle finger. Calluses, he murmured. That's good. Then he looked me in the eye. Show me what you've drawn. I pulled a bundle of parchment from my coat and laid them out. Floral pendants, cufflinks with oak leaves, a tiny ring shaped like a coiled fox. Mr. Harlan said nothing for a long while. Then he simply nodded. You'll begin tomorrow. Early. We polish at dawn. Bring nothing you can't afford to stain. I left that day feeling something stir in me. It wasn't joy. Not yet. It was resolve. I worked every morning before sunrise and every evening after dinner. Mr. Harlan was a patient teacher, though he rarely praised. The stone will speak, he always said. Don't rush its silence. By spring, I could set stones on my own. By summer, I was cutting them, and by autumn, I had crafted my first ring, silver with a sapphire heart, surrounded by delicate vines. I didn't wear it. I placed it in a wooden box and stored it with the others I began to make. As my skill grew, word spread. People from nearby towns came asking for custom work, engagement pieces, memorial lockets, anniversary pins. Mr. Harlan stepped aside more and more, until one cold November day, he handed me the keys. I'm too old to worry about symmetry, he chuckled. And you, Miss Grace, were born for brilliance. I named the shop Thompson and Light, after my mother's maiden name, and then, I began to dream larger. I traveled to Boston, then Savannah, then all the way to Charleston, where I trained under gem merchants and silversmiths. By my 26th birthday, I was no longer the woodcarver's daughter. I was Grace Thompson, the up-and-coming jeweler known for work so precise, it sang in silence, as one newspaper had put it. And then, one day in early December, a letter arrived. The handwriting was sloppy, the paper cheap. Merrick and Sons is going under. Our creditors are pulling out. Do you buy back antique gold? No signature. Just the shop stamp. I held the letter in my hands and felt a flicker of something old, not sadness, not even hatred, just the calm silence that comes when you finally know the truth. He never gave me a wooden ring because love didn't need diamonds. He gave it because he had no intention of ever giving me more. The morning after that letter arrived, I stood inside my workshop long before the sun touched Eldridge. The windows were fogged from the furnace heat. The room smelled of soldering flux, warm metal, and lavender oil, the scent I always dabbed on my gloves to steady my breath while working on precision cuts. I didn't tell anyone what I planned to make. Not my new apprentice. Not Mr. Harlan, who still visited every Thursday, and certainly not the banker who stopped by last week to ask if I was interested in small-town property acquisition. I retrieved my mother's velvet roll, worn soft and still embroidered with her initials, and opened it slowly. Inside were the tools she once used: a hand file, an old bezel pusher, and a tiny wax carver, barely the size of my finger. Then, I unlocked the steel box where I kept the finest stone I'd ever owned, a flawless round-cut diamond, just over 4 carats. A gift from a grateful client who had no children to leave it to. I had kept it for years, waiting. This was its moment. I spent hours shaping the band platinum, strong but subtle. I carved a delicate twist around the setting, like 2 vines wrapped in a silent dance. And inside the band, I engraved a single word: worthless. When I was done, I sat with the ring under a lamp, watching the light break into 1,000 slivers across its facets. It was breathtaking and cold, exactly the way I felt the day I watched him kneel for someone else. I placed the ring in a small walnut box lined with velvet and sealed with a wax stamp bearing my shop's crest. Then I wrote a note on fine paper, using my best calligraphy. This is what you said love didn't need. Now you know what worthless really feels like. Grace Thompson. The next morning, I sent it via private courier to Merrick and Sons, the shop Caleb had inherited from his father and, according to the banker, run straight into the ground. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. I didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't want to be told he regretted it. Regret is a whisper people use when truth shouts too loud to bear. Instead, I dressed in slate blue, tied my hair with silver ribbon, and returned to my workbench. Later that week, the banker returned. Red in the face and damp from the cold. "Grace," he said, barely able to hide his glee, "the Merrick property went to auction. No buyers. It's yours if you want it. You can name your price." I didn't hesitate. "I'll take it," I replied, "but only under one condition." He blinked. "Which is?" "That you deliver my deed in person. To Mr. Caleb Merrick. On Christmas Eve, right before closing." The banker paused, then gave a slow smile. "It would be my honor." Christmas Eve arrived, and with it, snow so thick it looked like the sky had forgotten how to stop weeping. I didn't go near the Merrick shop. I stayed in my workshop, stringing together garnet necklaces for a bridal set and sipping cinnamon tea. But I imagined him, standing behind the same counter where his father once boasted about imports from Charleston and silk from France. His hands, dry, his accounts empty, the windows frosted not from wealth but from time catching up. And then the banker walks in. He hands over a sealed envelope. Inside is not money, not salvation, but a transfer of ownership. The shop, the land, the registry, all now signed over to the woman he once gave a ring made of wood. I imagine the way his breath hitched, the sting in his chest when he saw my name, Grace Thompson, written in bold across the legal line, the same name he used to whisper like a secret in the orchard's shade. But that part of me is gone now, the girl who believed love was enough. She was buried under that first snowfall. Years ago, in her place stands a jeweler with diamond hands and a heart that doesn't forgive but doesn't forget either. I didn't send the ring to hurt him. I sent it to finish the sentence he never let me speak. The following morning, I received a letter. No name on the outside. Just my initials, GD, written in the curling loops of handwriting I hadn't seen in nearly 8 years. I stared at it for a moment, fingers unmoving. Then I set it aside. I didn't need to read Caleb's regrets. Not then, not ever. But curiosity is a fickle companion. By evening, when the fire had burned low and the shop was quiet, I finally broke the seal. "Grace, I don't know where to begin, so I'll begin with the truth. I failed you. I chose what my father wanted. I chose wealth over love, and I paid for it every year that followed. You don't need to believe me, but I want you to know I never forgot the girl with callous fingers and the heart that saw value in things the world dismissed. I saw the ring. I read your note. I signed the papers. All of it is yours now, and rightfully so. If I could go back, if I could return to that spring in the orchard, I'd choose you. Every time. But I know I can't. I wish you well. Kalibi." Folded the letter and tucked it into the back of my ledger, behind receipts and gemstone certificates where it would remain, acknowledged, but not honored. By New Year's, I had fully taken over the Merrick property. The townspeople watched quietly as the new sign went up. Thompson Goldworks Custom Jewelry, and Desigsum congratulated me. Some whispered. A few older women narrowed their eyes, muttering that a girl should know her place, but I had heard that before. I simply smiled, thanked them sweetly, and returned to my blueprints. I remodeled the showroom, knocked out the heavy drapes Caleb's family had used to block the windows, and replaced them with glass that invited the sun. I filled the shelves with handcrafted pieces, rings shaped like leaves, necklaces designed to reflect moonlight, bracelets woven with memory stones. Then I hired 2 women, Martha, whose husband had left her with 4 children and no way to feed them, Emily, once a maid in the Merrick home, now my chief gemstone polisher. I didn't just open a shop, I opened a place where women like me could start again. And Eldridge responded. By Easter, Thompson Goldworks had more orders than I could fill. People came from neighboring towns, then from cities I'd never even visited. I was featured in a traveling merchant's catalog and offered commissions from jewelry houses in Savannah and Baltimore. But I stayed, because Eldridge wasn't just where I had been broken. It was where I had been forged. And the town, though still full of whispers and memory, had changed too. One chilly morning, I heard a bell jingle above the door. I looked up from my sketchbook. There stood Marian Belaford. She hadn't changed much. Her hair was still the color of winter wheat, her gloves stitched from imported leather, but her face, it had aged, not in years, but in spirit. She walked slowly, as though unsure of her place. "Grace," she said, eyes cast down, "I came to order something, if you'll have me." I set my pencil down gently. "What are you looking for?" She reached into her purse and unfolded a sketched delicate bracelet with intertwined initials. Something for my daughter. She turns 12 next month. Her daughter. His daughter. I felt no burn of jealousy, no knot in my throat, just stillness. She likes vines, Marianne added. And forget-me-nots. I nodded. That can be done. Come back in 2 weeks. She stood silent for a moment, then whispered, you do beautiful work. I met her eyes. I always did. She left quietly. I returned to my design table and began sketching, not for her, not for Caleb, not even for revenge, but for a girl I once was, the girl who believed a wooden ring meant forever. Now I knew better. Love is not built on promises. It is built on action, on sacrifice, on truth. And if you can't build it with those, then you don't build it at all. 2 weeks later, just as the frost began to melt from the eaves of the shop, Marianne returned to collect the bracelet. She stepped into the showroom with careful steps, her boots clicking against the polished wooden floor. I handed her a navy blue velvet box, modest but elegant. She opened it, and her lips parted. Inside lay the bracelet, sterling silver, formed of tiny vines entwined into a delicate chain. In the center sat a trio of tiny, sky blue sapphires shaped like forget-me-not petals, cradling 2 hand-carved initials, Elm, Lillian Merrick, a child's name, carried in stones that would never tarnish. Marianne's fingers trembled as she touched the piece. It's perfect, she whispered. It's more than I imagined. Your daughter will outshine it, I replied, my tone neutral. She nodded. She has your eyes. The words lingered, awkward and exposed. She didn't mean them cruelly, just truthfully. But the thought of that man's daughter bearing my eyes felt like salt on a wound that had long stopped bleeding. Still, I smiled. Thank you for your business. She hesitated. Grace, there's a Christmas gathering next week at the Belaford estate. I'd like you to come. I tilted my head. You'd like the girl who was once hidden from your guest list to attend your celebration? Marianne flushed. I know it's strange, but the truth is, you've become someone the town respects. And I think perhaps it would be healing for all of us. I stared at her, not with hatred, not even pity, just the quiet awareness that comes from knowing someone finally sees you after years of pretending you were invisible. I'll think about it, I said. She nodded, as though she knew that was the best answer she'd get. Then she paid in full and left with the bracelet tucked under her arm. I didn't plan to attend, but that night, I sat in front of my fireplace with the letter Caleb had sent folded neatly on my lap. The edges were frayed now. I hadn't read it since that first time, but I hadn't thrown it away either. A voice in me whispered, you don't have to show up for them, but you can show up for yourself. So on Christmas Eve, just before sunset, I dressed in a gown of midnight blue velvet, the same color as the sky on the night I'd once watched him propose to her. My hair was twisted into a soft braid down my back, and I wore earrings shaped like icicles, tipped with tiny pearls. I walked into the Belaford estate not as a guest desperate to be noticed, but as a woman with nothing to prove. The house was glowing with lantern light and trimmed with pine garlands. Soft carols floated from the parlor. Heads turned as I entered. Some murmured my name. Others watched in stunned silence. Marianne approached quickly, her cheeks flushed with what I imagined was equal parts joy and nerves. I'm glad you came, she said. I nodded. So am I. Then from across the room, I saw him, Caleb. He stood near the fireplace, dressed in a charcoal vest and wool coat. His hair was shorter now, the curls stiff with age. His face bore lines that hadn't been there before, not just time's doing, but life's weight. He looked at me, and for a moment, the room quieted. He stepped forward slowly. Grace, he said, voice low, steady. Caleb? Neither of us moved to embrace, to shake hands, or even to fake pleasantries, just silence. He looked at me like someone trying to recognize a country they once fled. You've done well, he said finally. Yes, I replied. I have. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either. But then again, I've always finished what I started. His gaze dropped. He nodded. You were always the brave one. I smiled. No, I was just the one who remembered. With that, I turned and walked away toward the main hall where children laughed beneath a chandelier, and music spilled through the air like snow. I didn't look back, because there was nothing behind me worth returning to. Not anymore. The Belaford Christmas gathering faded behind me like the final note of a carol, soft, pleasant, but no longer necessary to the melody of my life. I walked back to town through the snowy streets of Eldridge, the moon overhead casting a silver glow along my path. My boots crunched on the frostbitten ground, the chill sneaking past my hem, but I felt nothing but warmth, not from the weather, but from clarity. I passed by the old oak tree outside what had once been Merrick and Sons. It stood like a sentinel, aged, gnarled, but still reaching. Caleb and I had once carved our initials there, hidden between the roots. They were still there, but faded now, almost gone, and I liked it that way. The next morning, Christmas Day, I unlocked the doors to Thompson Goldworks as usual. The sky was blushing with the pink of early sun, and the streets were still quiet. Most of the town was nestled around fires, opening gifts, drinking cider, but I had never liked receiving gifts. I liked building them. I turned the key, stepped inside, and walked to my workbench. On it sat a box wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. No label, no card. I stared at it, then slowly opened it. Inside was a wooden ring, my wooden ring. I lifted it gently, held it in my palm. It had aged, darkened by time and wear, but the carving on the inside still legible read, "Love needs no gold, except." Now I knew better. Love doesn't need gold, true, but it does need truth, and courage, and sacrifice. I stared at the ring for a long time, then dropped it into the fire at the side hearth. It crackled once, then vanished into flame, not out of spite, not for drama, but because I had outgrown the version of myself who once believed that love could survive on sentiment alone. That day, instead of keeping the shop closed, I put out a sign that read, "Open for stories, not sales. Come in, sit down, and share a memory." And they did. One by one, people came. Old Mr. Harlan, young couples, mothers with daughters, widows with tears in their eyes. They sat across from me, fingers touching the velvet trays of bracelets and brooches and rings. They told me stories: first loves, lost loves, forbidden loves, forever loves, and I listened. By the time twilight came, I had heard more beauty than a cathedral full of hymns. That night, as I swept the shop and set the lamps low, I realized something. I hadn't built this shop to sell jewels. I had built it to reclaim the sparkle I once thought I lost. And now that sparkle lived in every corner of this place. It was in the brushstrokes of my designs. In the polished shine of every gem. In the stories that passed between hands that used to tremble but now were courage in silver and gold. I went to bed early that night, slept without dreaming, and in the morning, I woke to a world that no longer felt like it owed me anything, because I had taken what I once lost and forged it into something no one could take from me again. 3 days after Christmas, the town of Eldridge stirred gently under a thick blanket of snow. The new year was drawing near, and with it, the quiet rustle of resolutions and renewed hopes. I was tidying the display case when the bell above the door chimed softly. I looked up, expecting a curious customer or perhaps another holiday storyteller. Instead, a young girl entered. No more than 11, perhaps 12. She had pale skin, curly wheat-colored hair tucked into a knitted cap, and eyes so startlingly familiar. They stole the air from my lungs. Lillian Merrick. I knew her name from the bracelet. She glanced around the shop, her gloved hands folded in front of her. "Hello," she said, her voice quiet but sure. "Are you Miss Grace?" "I am," I replied, stepping out from behind the counter. "And you must be Lillian." She smiled, wide and proud. "My mama said you made my bracelet. It's my favorite gift ever." I smiled back. "That means a lot to me." She hesitated. "May I ask something strange?" "Of course. Will you teach me?" I blinked. "Teach you?" She nodded. "To make things like my bracelet. Mama says I'm always drawing and tinkering, but I want to learn how to make real things, things that last." I stood there, stunned, not by her question but by the storm of feelings that surged in its wake. This girl his daughter wanted to learn from me. I looked down at her bracelet, gleaming under her coat sleeve, and then into her eyes. There was no guilt in her gaze, no awkwardness, only curiosity, innocence, and the fire of someone who wanted to build, the same fire I'd once had, long ago. "Come with me," I said gently. I led her behind the showroom, into the heart of the shop, the workshop. The air smelled of silver dust and warm wax. The walls were lined with tools, stones, settings, and soft cloths. I pointed to a stool beside the main bench. "That was my mother's seat, and mine. Now, maybe it can be yours too." Her eyes widened. "Really? Only if you're willing to work. No shortcuts." "I am," she said without hesitation. I handed her a pair of child-sized safety glasses and an old sketch pad. Then you start today. And she did. That first day, I taught her how to draw a ring band from 3 angles. She picked it up quickly, asking sharp questions, shading her lines with surprising instinct. Over the next few weeks, Lillian became a regular visitor. She helped sweep the shop, polish stones, and clean settings. She learned to measure metals, to read carat stamps, and to hold a graver steady without shaking. Her hands were small, but her mind was focused. I never asked her why she came alone. She never mentioned her father, and I never brought him up. But one snowy afternoon, as she etched her first initials into a brass disc, she paused and asked, "Did you know my papa when you were young?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, a long time ago." She turned the disc in her hand. "He says he made mistakes." I said nothing. "He says not everyone gets a second chance," she added, carefully placing the piece into the tin tray. "Still," I said, "nothing," because life had taught me that some truths didn't need telling. They simply unfolded. But as I looked at her, the girl with my eyes and her mother's quiet courage, I realized something. This wasn't about Caleb anymore, or Marianne, or even revenge. This was about legacy, about what we build when the ashes cool, about how forgiveness isn't always a gift we give others but a freedom we give ourselves. I didn't forgive Caleb with words. I forgave him by teaching his daughter how to create beauty from nothing, and in doing so, I gave myself something I never expected to find again: peace. Winter began to thaw. The icicles dripping from the eaves of Thompson Gold Works melted into soft rivulets that sang their way into the cobblestone cracks of Eldridge. By the first week of March, the town smelled faintly of damp earth and wood smoke. A promise of spring lingered in the air. Lillian still came every other afternoon, now with her sketchbook full of wild designs, some whimsical, some oddly elegant for her age. She was blooming before my eyes, her voice stronger, her posture straighter, her curiosity insatiable. It became clear she didn't just have talent, she had vision. One afternoon, as she packed up her things, she asked, "Miss Grace, can I show you something I made at home?" Of course. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a velvet pouch. Inside was a tiny pendant, a clumsy piece of tin shaped into a heart with a single seed pearl glued to the center. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. "I made it for my mama," she said. "She doesn't wear much jewelry, but I thought maybe she'd wear something from me." I smiled. "She'll treasure it more than anything store-bought, I promise." Lillian beamed, then skipped out of the shop, her boots splashing in the half-melted snow. When she disappeared down the lane, I sat alone at my bench, staring at the empty workshop. My gaze wandered to the shelf above my desk, a shelf I hadn't touched in years. It held a small wooden box, not the one with the ring. That was long gone. This one held letters I had once written but never sent. To Caleb.to his father. To Marianne.to myself. I pulled the box down and sat with it. The papers were yellowed at the edges, ink faded in places, tear streaked in others. Each envelope was sealed but unaddressed. I had written them in the quietest hours of my heartbreak, when the world slept but my thoughts didn't. I opened the top one. "Grace, if you are reading this, you're still trying to make sense of it, still wondering why love was measured in gifts and not in honesty. You are not weak, you are not unworthy, you are not forgettable, you are becoming. Let it break you only long enough to make space for the woman who rises. You'll forge gold one day, not just with fire but with the burn of memory." I folded the letter and smiled. I wasn't that girl anymore, but she was the reason I had become this woman. That evening, I locked the shop and walked through town with the box under my arm. The wind had picked up, biting through my coat, but I kept walking down Main Street, past the bakery, around the bend where the old post office still stood. I stopped at the edge of the frozen pond where Caleb had once taken me skating. Before we spoke of futures we couldn't afford to chase. The water was iced over, but the snow had melted in patches, revealing the dark glassy surface beneath. I stepped forward and scattered the letters one by one across the ice. The wind caught them, sending them drifting like tired birds. One fluttered back toward my feet, its flap unsealing itself. I picked it up and read the last line. "One day, you'll see revenge wasn't the ending. It was only the spark." I let it go. I stood there until the last envelope slipped out of view, lost somewhere between the ripples of memory and the silence of healing. And as I turned back toward town, I didn't feel lighter or freer or even vindicated. I just felt whole, for the first time in years. A week before Easter, The bell above the shop door rang as I was polishing the clasp on a custom necklace. I glanced up, expecting Lillian or maybe a neighbor with a repair request, but it was Caleb. He stood awkwardly just inside the doorway, snow dusting the shoulders of his brown overcoat. His hair had thinned more, and he carried a leather satchel under one arm. His eyes searched the room like he was stepping into a dream he wasn't sure belonged to him anymore. "Grace," he said, soft but certain. I didn't rise from the workbench. "You're late. 20 years, give or take," he offered a weak smile. "I deserve that." I set down my tools carefully, wiped my hands with the cloth beside me, and finally looked him full in the face. He looked tired, not just from the road but from life. "I wasn't sure I should come," he admitted, "but Lillian talks about you a lot. I thought maybe I should say thank you." I stood. "You don't owe me thanks, Caleb. Your daughter's the one doing the work." He nodded. "She's a wonder, isn't she? She gets that from you." "No," I said flatly. "She gets that from herself." A silence settled between us, heavy, but not hostile, just honest. He approached the counter slowly. "I came because I wanted to tell you something," he said. "Not about the past. I think we both lived enough of that." He unlatched the satchel and pulled out a small box. I froze. Not again, I thought, but when he opened it, inside wasn't a ring, it was the deed to the old Merrick and Sons building. "I can't fix what I did, Grace," he said, "but this place, it's empty now." I was going to sell it just to stay afloat. Then I thought maybe it was time something worthwhile came out of it. I looked at the deed, then at him. "Why?" I asked. "Because Lillian deserves a future. And she deserves a teacher who remembers what it's like to be overlooked. And because I know the kind of woman you are now. The kind I should have seen back then." I took the box, closed it gently, and set it on the counter. "I'm not accepting this for you," I said. "I'm accepting it for her." He nodded. "That's all I hoped." He turned to go, but paused at the door. "Grace?" he asked. "Yes? Do you ever think we were meant to find each other again?" I tilted my head, not unkindly. "No, I think we were meant to part so I could become who I needed to be." He stood there, absorbing that, and then gave a single, respectful nod. "Goodbye, Grace. Goodbye, Caleb." The door closed behind him, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, not because I was sad, but because it was done. Not just the anger, not just the grief, but the final tether between who I had been and who I was now. That afternoon, I walked to the Merrick building, now mine, and stood in the quiet ruins of what used to be a promise unfulfilled. The windows were dusty, the floor creaked, but the bones were strong, and in that moment, I saw a school, not a school of arithmetic or grammar, but a school of creation, of craft, of legacy, for girls like me, like Lillian, who had more fire in their hands than the world knew what to do with. By sunset, I had sketched the first blueprint for Thompson's School of Artisan Jewelry, a place not just to learn but to shine. By the time the first leaves began to turn gold in Eldridge, the doors of the Thompson School of Artisan Jewelry opened. The Merrick and Sons building had been transformed not with opulence, but with soul. Exposed beams were polished to a shine. Velvet curtains, hand-sewn by local seamstresses, framed tall windows that bathed the workstations in gentle light. Each desk had its own set of tools, neatly aligned, waiting for young hands to shape metal into meaning. The smell of oil, fresh wood, and molten silver filled the air. And on the first day of class, a bell rang, not to signal lessons, but to mark a new beginning. 10 girls took their seats, 10 minds ready to learn, 10 hearts ready to create. At the front of the room stood Lillian Merrick, now 13, wearing a smock far too big for her, but with shoulders steady and proud. Her fingers bore small nicks from weeks of practice, but her eyes held the light of discovery. I stood beside her, no longer just a jeweler but a mentor, a keeper of stories, a guide for the girls who had once been me. That day, I shared my first lesson, not about alloys or gem grades, but about value. "How much is a ring worth?" I asked. One girl said, "However much gold it has." Another said, "The stone in it." A third whispered, "How much someone will pay." I smiled. "All wrong," I said. "A ring's worth comes from the hands that make it, and the hands that wear it." I took a deep breath and continued. "There was a time when someone gave me a ring made of wood. He said love didn't need gold. I believed him, until he turned and gave a diamond to someone else." The girls leaned in silent. I thought I had lost. I thought I was unworthy because I had nothing but my heart to give. But I was wrong. I had fire, I had vision, and I had time. With those three things, I built something no diamond could outshine. I stepped back, letting those words settle. Then I let them work. As hammers clinked and sketchbooks filled, I watched something rare unfold. Not just talent, not just skill, but resilience. At noon, Lillian approached me. She was holding a velvet box, small, square, and familiar. I want you to have this, she said softly. I opened it. Inside was a ring, but not just any ring. It was a silver band, delicately engraved with vines. At the center sat a pearl, not flawless, but luminous. I made it, she said, for you. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I had already shed all the tears I'd needed to become the woman standing there now. Instead, I placed the ring on my own finger. Thank you, I whispered. That night, after the last girl left and the lights dimmed, I sat alone in the studio, staring at the glowing forge. I thought of all the things I once wanted: apologies, revenge, closure. And then I thought of what I had now: purpose. Love had once betrayed me, but it had also shaped me. It had shown me what I didn't deserve so I could one day recognize what I did. I was no longer the girl with the wooden ring. I was the woman who turned pain into art, and art into legacy. And somewhere, in a dusty drawer of a bankrupt shop, a man I once loved now held a diamond he couldn't sell. Because worth isn't measured in carats, it's measured in who you become after you've been broken. Reflection. Questions. Do you think Caleb ever truly loved Grace, or did he simply love the idea of her? What do you believe changed Grace more, his betrayal, or her own choice to rise beyond it? Is revenge sweeter when it's silent and purposeful, or loud and destructive? Subscribe to more revenge stories. Share, like, comment.